AITA for being upfront about the fact that I will not be doing things with my nephew or being the fun uncle, since I don't like kids and never agreed to be the fun uncle. I always knew I wasn't a kid person. It's never been a mystery to anyone in my life, especially not my family. I don't find children cute, their energy exhausts me, and I have zero interest in dealing with them. I don't hate them or anything, but I just don't want to be responsible for one in any capacity. I like my peace, my quiet, and my freedom. So when my sister Lauren got pregnant, I already knew what my approach was going to be: polite, distant, supportive in the bare minimum way, but never stepping into anything that even remotely resembled a parental role. She was ecstatic when she found out she was having a boy, already picking out names before the gender was confirmed. She landed on David, and I said nothing about it because it wasn't my business. But what was my business, or at least what was made to be my business, was the fact that David's father, Brian, was, to put it bluntly, a complete and utter loser. Brian had already checked out of the situation long before David was even born. He was in and out of Lauren's life during the pregnancy, throwing out half-hearted promises about how he was going to step up, while also proving through his actions that he had no intention of doing so. By the time she was showing, Brian had all but vanished. No financial support, no emotional support, nothing. It was a mess, and I did feel bad for Lauren, but at the same time, I wasn't about to pick up the slack for a man who should have never been in the picture in the first place. As Lauren's due date got closer, she started talking more and more about how David was going to need strong male figures in his life. She said things like, "Boys without fathers end up looking for mentorship in all the wrong places," and, "I don't want him to grow up thinking he doesn't have men in his life to look up to." I saw where this was going a mile away. The way she kept mentioning family stepping up made it clear she expected me to play some big, hands-on role in David's life. I wasn't about to let that assumption sit and grow into a problem later, so I told her up front, "I'm not going to be the fun uncle type, and I won't be stepping in as any kind of parental figure. I'd show up to family gatherings, send gifts on his birthday and Christmas, but that was it. It wasn't personal, I just didn't want to be responsible for a child, any child, period." I've always felt that way, and nothing about David's situation was going to change that. Lauren did not take it well. She went off about how I was his uncle, how family was supposed to be there no matter what, how I was essentially saying I was okay with my own nephew growing up without guidance. I pointed out that David wasn't actually going to be lacking for male figures in his life. Brian's brother, Andrew, was very eager to be involved. He had 2 kids of his own, so David would have cousins close in age to grow up with. And then there was our other brother, George, who had already made it clear that he wanted to be the involved uncle. David wasn't going to be lacking anything just because I chose to keep my distance. But Lauren wasn't having it. She said it wasn't the same, that uncle figures still weren't the same as an actual father, and that the more support David had, the better. She called me selfish and said I was flaking out on my own blood. That's what got under my skin. Because in order to flake out on something, you have to have agreed to it in the first place. And I never did. I never once said I'd be an involved uncle, I never even implied it. I was upfront about my boundaries from the start. I get that she's struggling, and I do feel for her, but it's not my responsibility to compensate for Brian's absence. She kept pushing, saying things like, "It's not like I'm asking you to raise him, but what's so hard about taking him to a museum once in a while? Having him over for a sleepover?" I could already see where that would go. It starts with something small, and then suddenly, I'm the one she's calling when she needs someone to watch him last minute. I'm the one expected to show up for every milestone, to play catch in the yard, to help him navigate life. And that's not a commitment I ever wanted to make. The way I see it, one distant uncle who only shows up for holidays isn't going to ruin a kid's life. If anything, it's going to be the least of David's worries. He has other family members who are excited to take on that role, and I'm not stopping them. I just don't understand why Lauren is putting all this pressure on me specifically when there are 2 other men already stepping up. I don't think I'm wrong here. I never signed up for this, and I don't think it's fair for anyone to expect me to take on a role I don't want. But Lauren clearly sees it differently, and now I'm wondering if I'm the bad guy for standing firm on my boundaries. Update 1. I thought that after I clearly defined my boundaries, Lauren would leave me alone. I had laid it all out, no room for misinterpretation, no wiggle room for negotiation. I wasn't going to be the fun uncle, I wasn't going to step into any kind of fatherly role, and I wasn't going to let anyone guilt me into something I had zero interest in doing. I had drawn the line, and I expected it to be respected. I thought that was the end of it, that she would process it, maybe be annoyed for a little while, but ultimately accept that I wasn't going to be part of her grand vision of David's future. But no. Lauren decided that I simply hadn't been pushed hard enough. At first, she tried the emotional angle, the kind of argument designed to make me feel like a cold, unfeeling bastard. She told me I wasn't even giving him a chance, that he wasn't even born yet, and I had already decided that I didn't want to be a part of his life. She said it like it was some kind of crime, like I had already condemned this child to a life of misery just by choosing to remain distant. Her voice wavered slightly, not quite at the edge of tears, but definitely performing the kind of emotional hurt that was meant to make me feel like I was personally betraying her. I just shrugged. Lack of enthusiasm didn't mean hate, and I told her exactly that. Just because I didn't want to be involved didn't mean I had some sort of deep resentment for David. I didn't dislike him, I just wasn't interested. It was that simple. Lauren didn't see it that way. She stared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and growing frustration, like I had just casually admitted to kicking puppies for fun. Her mouth opened slightly like she was searching for words, then closed again, like she was trying to process the sheer audacity of my indifference. As if the concept of someone not immediately falling in love with the idea of being an uncle was so far beyond her understanding that she couldn't even find a proper response. She shook her head, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off, as if that would somehow change my mind. Then my parents came into play, because of course they did. There was no way Lauren was going to let this go without rallying reinforcements, and who better than the people who had spent their entire lives drilling "family first" into our heads. My mother was the first to step in, armed with the same speech she had probably given a dozen times before in various forms. She started in with the old song and dance about how family is the greatest treasure, how these bonds were sacred, and how one day I would regret not being closer to David. She warned me that if I didn't step up now, I would ruin my relationship with Lauren forever, that she would never look at me the same way again, that I would create a distance between us that I could never undo. Then came the part about how being an uncle was a gift, an opportunity, as if I was being offered some incredible, once-in-a-lifetime experience that I was stupid to pass up. She spoke about how special it was to watch a child grow, to be someone they looked up to shape their world in some meaningful way. I nodded along, but not because I agreed. I had heard all of this before in different variations, all boiling down to the same core argument: family is everything, and you're supposed to step up no matter what. It was the same guilt-laden nonsense people always used when they wanted to pressure someone into falling in line. I could have engaged with her, could have pointed out that I didn't find any of this compelling, that none of it changed the fact that I had no interest in being responsible for a child in any capacity. But I didn't bother. I just let her talk, let her say everything she needed to say, because I knew there was nothing I could say in return that would make her see my side of things. To her, family obligations weren't up for debate. You did what was expected of you, full stop. My father, on the other hand, took a different approach. He didn't argue, didn't try to guilt-trip me, didn't get emotional. He just made a simple statement, one that was somehow even more frustrating than my mother's speech. When he's born, you'll change your mind anyway. He said it so matter-of-factly, like it wasn't even a question, like it was a universal truth that I had yet to understand. It was the kind of thing people say when they believe, without a doubt, that their experience outweighs your own perspective. That made me laugh, genuinely, because it was such an absurd thing to say. As if parenthood was some kind of virus that infected everyone who came into contact with a baby. As if the moment David entered the world, something inside me would click, and I would suddenly be filled with an overwhelming urge to be involved. Like I'd wake up in the middle of the night craving the sound of baby giggles, desperate to spend my weekends at playgrounds and museums. As if my entire personality would just shift on its own, purely because a baby existed in my family. I knew myself better than that. I wasn't going to change my mind, not when David was born, not when he took his first steps, not when he started school. Nothing about my feelings would suddenly morph just because other people thought they should. I told them I wouldn't. I told them I'd stand by my position no matter how much pressure they put on me. It felt like they weren't convinced. Update 2. The next stage of manipulation began around the 7th month of Lauren's pregnancy. Up until that point, it had been all about emotional arguments, family expectations, and this absurd idea that I would suddenly change my mind the second I laid eyes on my nephew. She had tried to reason with me, to push all the right buttons, to get our parents involved in the hopes that their voices would sway me. But when none of that worked, when she saw that I wasn't budging no matter how much pressure she and the rest of the family applied, she changed tactics. She started using the pregnancy card. It was subtle at first. Little comments slipped into conversations, almost casually. She'd sigh heavily in the middle of a sentence, let her voice trail off as if she was too exhausted to finish her own thoughts. She started talking more about how hard everything had become, how getting up from the couch was a struggle, how her feet were swollen, how she felt like she was carrying the weight of the world, both physically and emotionally. At first, I thought it was just venting, just typical pregnancy complaints, the kind that every pregnant woman goes through and talks about. But then it became clear that this wasn't just her expressing discomfort. This was something more. She would call me late in the evening, her voice softer than usual, laced with exhaustion, with an almost practiced vulnerability. There was a weight behind her words, a carefully measured sadness, like every syllable had been chosen to maximize the guilt she was trying to inflict. She talked about how tired she was, how much her legs ached, how hard it was to do the simplest things now. She said she was scared of being a single mother, that she had no idea how she was going to do this alone. She let that statement hang in the air, waiting for me to be the one to fill the silence, to say the thing she wanted me to say. She spoke slowly, deliberately, weaving guilt into every sentence. If I would just be there for a little while, it would mean the world to her. It wasn't a direct request. It was an emotional landmine. She wanted me to step into it voluntarily. She wasn't outright asking me to take on the role she wanted me to fill. No, she wanted me to offer. She wanted me to feel so guilty, so emotionally obligated, that I would be the one to suggest it. That way, she could act like it had been my decision all along. This, I admit, hit a little harder. This wasn't just about demanding something from me anymore. It wasn't an argument, it wasn't an accusation, it wasn't a lecture about what family meant or how I was failing her and my unborn nephew. This was deeper. This was personal. She wasn't just trying to get me to step up as an uncle, she was trying to get me to step up for her. She was framing it in a way that made me feel like the only one who could help, the only one who could make this easier, the only one who could give her some peace of mind. I sat with that feeling for a while. It gnawed at me in a way the previous conversations hadn't. I wasn't heartless. I wasn't immune to my sister's suffering. I understood that this was a difficult time for her, that she was carrying a weight I would never fully understand. And for a brief moment, I felt like a terrible person. I wondered if I was being too rigid, too unwilling to bend. Was I letting my own personal feelings about kids blind me to the fact that my sister genuinely needed help? Was I so caught up in my own boundaries that I was ignoring the very real struggles she was facing? But then, I took a step back. I thought about it logically, without the weight of guilt hanging over me. This wasn't just an honest confession of her fears. This wasn't a moment of vulnerability shared between siblings. This was manipulation, whether she realized it or not. This was an attempt to break me down, to chip away at my boundaries piece by piece until I gave in. She was trying to wear me down, to make me feel like there was no choice, no alternative. That unless I stepped up in the exact way she wanted, I wasn't just being distant, I was being cruel. I still stood my ground. I told her that I supported her, but not in the format she wanted. I told her that I could help financially, that if she was too exhausted to cook, I could send her food deliveries. If she needed assistance with errands, I could figure something out. But I wouldn't play the role of the father. I wouldn't suddenly become the man she expected me to be just because she was struggling. She started crying. That was the part that got to me the most. Not the anger, not the frustration, not the disappointment, those things bounced right off of me. But the tears, the raw emotion, the way she sobbed into the phone as if my refusal had broken her. That was the part that made me question myself. Was I really going too far? Was I being cruel? Was this stubbornness or selfishness? But then she said it. The thing that wiped away every ounce of doubt I had. You do realize that if you don't agree now, it's going to ruin our relationship, right? That was it. That was the moment I saw it for what it truly was. This was never just about support. This was about control. About bending me to her will. About making sure that I didn't just help in the way I was willing to, but in the way she demanded. It wasn't enough that I was offering my support on my own terms. She wanted me to do it her way, or not at all. She wanted me to feel cornered, to believe that the only way to salvage my relationship with her was to surrender. And I wasn't going to give up. Update 3. Closer to the birth, Lauren decided to resort to radical tactics. The emotional manipulation, the guilt-tripping, and the family pressure hadn't worked, so she escalated. This time, she didn't come at me directly. She started acting through our friends and relatives, enlisting them as her messengers, turning them into her personal army of persuasion. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to ignore. She would drop little comments during family gatherings, casual enough to seem innocent but pointed enough that I knew exactly who they were meant for. She would sigh dramatically and say things like, "Poor David, he's going to have such a cold and distant uncle." She never addressed me directly, just let the words float in the air like a passive-aggressive cloud, waiting for someone else to latch onto them. And, of course, someone always did. It would start with a well-meaning relative, the kind who always thought they had the right to weigh in on other people's lives. They would lean in with sympathetic eyes, lower their voice like they were about to share some grand wisdom, and start talking about how families should be there for each other. They would tell me that I had the chance to be something special in this child's life, that I could be the person he looked up to, that I was being too harsh by keeping my distance. I would brush it off, keep my responses short, make it clear that I wasn't interested in entertaining the conversation. But Lauren wasn't deterred. When the relatives didn't work, she moved on to our mutual friends. That was when it got really frustrating. Friends who had never expressed a single opinion about my personal life before were suddenly deeply invested in my relationship with my future nephew. They would ask leading questions, trying to sound casual, but their words were laced with Lauren's influence. "Are you sure you don't want to be involved? I think you'd be a great role model. Maybe you're just afraid of responsibility." That last one was particularly ridiculous. The idea that my refusal came from fear was almost laughable. People always assumed that if you didn't want something, it was because you were afraid of it. As if the only reason I didn't want to play daddy-uncle was because I was secretly terrified of it. It couldn't possibly be that I had thought about it, assessed it, and simply had no interest. No, it had to be some deep-seated fear of commitment or responsibility. It was exhausting. It felt like Lauren had set up an entire network of people whose sole job was to convince me that my own choices were wrong. And through all of it, she never addressed me directly. She just let the pressure build around me, hoping that if enough people pushed, I would eventually cave. But the best was her final attempt. It was desperate, almost comically so. She sent me a long message, one that I could tell she had thought through carefully, one that she probably rewrote a few times before hitting send. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't passive-aggressive, it was direct, to the point, and absolutely unhinged. She literally offered me the role of an official, second father. She started by acknowledging that she knew I didn't want to be a dad. As if that somehow softened what she was about to say. Then she went on to explain how, if I really thought about it, I was the logical choice to step up. I was her brother, which made me David's closest male relative. And because of that, she thought it would make sense if I were his shadow father. That was the phrase she used. Shadow father. Like some kind of backup dad, filling in the gaps where Brian had failed. Not just an involved uncle, but something more. Something permanent. That was it. That was the moment I was done. I couldn't take it anymore. I had been patient, I had been understanding, I had tried to set my boundaries in a way that wouldn't hurt her, but this was beyond anything I could accept. I wrote back immediately, short and to the point. If she tried to make me do this again, I would just stop talking to her. It wasn't negotiable. And this time, she knew she had overstepped. There was no response. No follow-up. No teary phone call. Just silence. The weeks leading up to David's birth were quiet. Unusually so. I knew she was still upset, knew she was probably venting to whoever would listen, but she had finally accepted that she wasn't going to get what she wanted. She had thrown everything at me, guilt, family, friends, sheer persistence, and none of it had worked. Lauren gave birth a few weeks later. The news came through the family chat, pictures started rolling in, everyone gushed over how beautiful he was. She was clearly still hurt, but she finally stopped her attacks. No more guilt trips, no more pressure, no more backdoor manipulation. I did what I said I would do. I showed up at the hospital, congratulated her, left a gift for David, and left. I did my part. I was there, I acknowledged the moment, I did what was expected of me and nothing more. She looked tired, emotional, overwhelmed, but most of all, she looked like she knew I wasn't who she wanted to see. But that was no longer my problem. Moral of the story: people will pressure you as long as you let them. Don't let them.